Welcome, History 201. We are moving to an online format and we'll be doing some lectures to kind of compensate for not being in the classroom anymore. And I'll try to make these quick. These always take me longer, as you all know, in the classroom than online. So I'll try to make them quick, maybe 10 minutes per lecture. That way, you're not just on the screen listening to me talk. All right. There will be some activities that we'll be doing, mostly discussion or just a quick assignment to kind of make sure that you're keeping up with the material and keeping up with the reading in particular. Okay, so let's get started. So this week we'll be talking about what historians have defined as the modern woman. And specifically, I'll be addressing working class women. So you read Emma Goldman's piece on marriage and love, and she's very instrumental in this kind of working class movement of the late 1800s and the early 1900s. So this is the kind of focus as to where modern feminism derived from. So before we get into all that, I want to address these ideals that these Victorians brought up. If you remember when we were covering the Coney Island article, how these Victorians represented women, right? That life had to be very kind of structured and very kind of middle class standard of living. And these values are something that kind of define America in the late 1800s. So women were supposed to be self-sacrificing. You know, they needed to focus mostly on the needs of family rather than their own. Also, they had very strict protocol. They could not be, out in public or at least without a man. And they really had to abide by very kind of standard religious ideals that are kind of grounded on American culture, American history. And when it came to sexuality, women, these Victorian women, had to repress their sexuality as much as possible. The notion was that women have no sexual desires. And the reason why I mentioned this is because we're going to talk about it with the piece of Emma Goldman, and also with some material that I'll add called kind of like a free love movement that happens in the 1900s. We always associate free love with maybe the 1960s, and we forget that, our great-great-grandmothers were doing this before any kind of civil rights movement or hippie movement or something like that. So again, the late 1800s represent the Victorian age and also the Gilded Age. But the 1900s, it's a new era. America is changing, as we read with Coney Island, which is part of the reason why I wanted you to read that article. Cities are growing. For the first time in history, we actually have people living 50-50. In other words, 50% live in rural areas and 50% live in the city. Unheard of prior to this period. In addition, you have immigrants coming in from different parts of the world. So people like Emma Goldman, or maybe some of your ancestors who came from Italy, where else? Eastern Europe, Germany, Russia, these countries that are at this time going through their kind of turmoils. A lot of these immigrants are leaving these places and coming to America. Not so much to search for an American dream, because that's more of a myth that was created later. But they were leaving these kind of horrible living conditions for different reasons. And they settled in different places, not just the United States, but other places like in Latin America. If you ever go to Argentina, there's a lot of Italians over there, and many even in Canada. And typically when we think of immigrants, we tend to think of them as kind of dumb or dim-witted or something like that. And many of these were quite intellectual. So when they arrive to America, they have to survive. And again, this is both men and women, and they join the labor movements of the 1900s. Today, you don't really see this, but in the 1900s, you had really strong labor movements, such as the IWW, the Industrial Workers of the World. And this was an exciting movement because this is one of the few unions that actually gave women a voice in the union, which is, again, unheard of at this time. Most of these unions were typically associated just with men, male workers. And these unions, the IWW in particular, focus on organizing not just women, but all workers of the world. So if you were Black, Asian, Latino, whatever, right? They really focus on organizing everybody, because everybody dealt with horrible working conditions at this time, where you can get killed doing your job. I have some videos, but I'll skip that for the purposes of this situation. Now, who were some of these women? Well, there's two that kind of stand out. One of them is Mother Jones. You could see her up here, right? Sweet old lady. She probably wouldn't seem as much of a threat, but she was probably one of the most important union leaders in American history. And even though she's not American, she joined the labor movement after her husband was killed in doing a job. And again, people should not be dying doing a job, right? So certain regulations needed to be implemented in order to address these type of situations in the workforce. So, as I said, her husband died. She became a single mom. She had a large family. And she helped found the IWW. And she has this great quote, very kind of feminist quote that I always love. And it says, "No matter what the fight, don't be ladylike. God Almighty made women, and the Rockefeller gangs of thieves made the ladies." Kind of insinuating that society, particularly men, create these notions of what proper female behavior is. And in doing so, they put women in a gilded cage, right? They restrict them from being who they are. And she was definitely somebody who advocated for women's right to vote. Another important figure that you read, and I'm sure you have your opinions on her after reading her piece, is Emma Goldman. Note that it almost feels like feminism derived from overseas. So even though we like to think as America being a very progressive nation, during this time it's quite the opposite. It's these women, these immigrants who are coming, who are advocating for women's rights at this time, and Emma Goldman is one of them. Like Mother Jones, they're not born in the United States. They're part of that large wave of immigrants in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And they are very radical women. And again, Mother Jones was part of the IWW. Today it would be considered communism, which is kind of ridiculous, but nevertheless, again, if it wasn't for these women, people would still be probably getting hurt in the workplace. Emma Goldman, though, she was an anarchist, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit later. But her boyfriend actually attempted to kill McKinley, President of the United States, and she was viewed as a radical. During World War I, during the, I can't remember the name of the act, but the government passed a particular act that basically anybody who was viewed as a threat to the war effort was deported. And Emma Goldman was viewed as a threat, not because of the war, but because of her union drives and her advocacy for the labor movements of the period. So the U.S. government kind of used these laws that they created during wartime to attack these people who they viewed as a threat. All right, but again, we'll talk about Emma Goldman, and again, she's one of the greatest feminists out there in U.S. history. So we'll stop it there. You'll have some discussion questions next, and just copy and paste them in your response and answer these questions. And part of them are related to the readings, others are related more to your opinion. Kind of see, I want to see what you thought of some of the ideas that she proposed. So the article that you read for this week is written by Emma Goldman, and she talks about this concept called free love, which challenges even our modern take on marriage, at least for many of us. All right, so I'll stop it there and then come back because we'll have another lecture.